People have told the story of the Knights Templar like a familiar prayer, that they were warriors of God protecting pilgrims on the blood-soaked road to Jerusalem. But I have seen beneath that surface another stream of memory hidden deep, like a sacred spring within the rock. There are things history cannot record, because if it did, the foundation of faith itself would tremble. I have seen their images, men in white robes, standing amid the sands and winds of the east, their eyes not only fixed upon the temple, but looking through the earth into the buried layers of the planet's memory. Outwardly they were knights, but within they were seekers. They searched not out of greed, but remembrance. For there are souls who carry within them the ache of a world that once was, where light was a friend and truth was heard like the breathing of the universe. When I read the current of time in a state of trance, I saw points of light like stars joining into an ancient symbol. The Templar order was not born of human will alone, but from a call that echoed across ages to restore what had been erased. Jerusalem was not only the city of God, but the scar upon the earth where light was sealed in stone. They were sent there as guardians of memory, those who knew that beneath the temple lay not only dust and bone, but the pulse of a power that once nourished humanity in its first dawn. In the visions that reached me, I heard the voice of a knight, his tone rising from the heart of the earth, saying, "We do not protect pilgrims, we protect truth, and truth is buried." I saw them digging in the night, not to find gold, but to recover the original sound of the world, the sound that rang when man still remembered how to speak with God. That was why they went. Not for Jerusalem, but for the memory of light. They understood that there are secrets which can only be found with hands covered in soil and hearts free of dust. When they knelt in the deep chambers, I saw their radiance flare like hidden fire. There was a sacred stillness in their digging, as if each stroke of the shovel was a prayer, each grain of earth falling a rhythm in the hymn of return. I understood then that every faith begins in darkness where light is not preached but unearthed. The story told of them, the noble protectors, was only the mask of a mission deeper, subtler, beyond the borders of theology. They were sent as messengers, but messengers for knowledge that transcended mankind. They sought something I can only call spiritual energy, a remnant of the age before the great flood, when man and God still shared one language. I saw them look at each other in silence, knowing that if they succeeded, history would not understand them, and the church would destroy them. Yet they went, driven by a call that did not belong to this world. In my revelations, they were not men in armor, but candles burning in the long night of humanity, searching for the lost fragment of light amid the ashes of faith. I know they understood the peril of knowledge, for true knowledge does not only open power, it opens the abyss. But they were not afraid. For them, faith was not a shell for fear, but the courage to gaze into what cannot be seen. When I touched that layer of energy, I saw the souls once clad in crimson cloaks, standing between two worlds, men of faith and men of sacred science. They knew the structure of light. They knew that the human soul could be a tower of energy where divine current moved as it does within the Pyramid of Giza. They understood what we now call free energy, but to them it was the energy of compassion. They did not seek to own, they sought to restore. I heard their voices across the astral plane saying that if the world once again understood light as we once did, we would need no electricity, no wars, no power, only love, for love is the current of God. Therefore, I say, do not believe they were only knights of battle. They were the ones who sought to renew the covenant between heaven and earth. And that covenant, across the ages, still echoes within us, like a gentle calling each time we long to understand, to believe, and to return to the first light. If you look up at the night sky, do believe that those stars are forming a map, not to guide your steps on earth, but to lead the human soul back to its origin. I once saw that map in a state of deep trance, not with my eyes, but with remembrance, as if the light within me recognized the light outside, and I knew that the map was the language of those whom history calls the brothers of the East. They do not appear in any common scripture. They have no names in the chronicles. Yet their influence flows through every ancient stream of wisdom. Egypt, Babylon, India, Greece, and finally Jerusalem. They were the ones who kept the memory of the civilization before the great flood, the ones who knew that energy and soul are one, that the universe is a vast breath in which all life vibrates at the same frequency. When the Knights Templar came to Constantinople, they did not come merely to seek passage through that land. They came because they had heard of a secret order, a group of scholars who served no king and worshipped no religion. They only served the light that was understood as the Spirit of God, working through the order of the cosmos. I saw in my vision, among marble halls and pale golden oil lamps, a circle of men in gray robes kneeling around a circular symbol with 8 petals, the first form of the Templar cross that would come later. They called themselves the Brotherhood of the East. They studied geometry not to measure the earth, but to measure the spirit. They observed the constellations not to navigate, but to read the language of the Creator. They listened to music not for pleasure, but to understand the vibrational structure of the soul. And when the Western Knights arrived, they did not teach them how to fight, but how to listen. They said, if you wish to recover the treasure of the pre-Adamic world, learn to read the stars as you read yourself. For the structure of the universe and the structure of the soul are one. I once asked why they called themselves the Brothers of the East. Why not of the North, where light also once came? They answered, because the East is where the sun rises, where life begins, and where knowledge is born. They said that the West seeks God in doctrine, while the East seeks him in silence. And they believed that when these two halves meet, the world will be healed. It was in that meeting between the people of the cross and the people of the star that a new covenant was formed. Hugues de Montclair, the one regarded as the soul of the Templar order, realized that their true mission was not merely to protect pilgrims, but to reconnect 2 streams of wisdom once divided, faith and knowledge, belief and science, heart and reason. They stayed in that city for many years, learning ancient languages, learning the sacred geometry, learning to look into the essence of man as into a living pyramid. The Brothers of the East taught that the human body is a temple, each chakra a planet, each heartbeat a rotation of the stars. When humanity remembers this, they can move between worlds without wings, bring light into matter, and turn their own bodies into instruments of the divine. I remember in a dream, a teacher in a gray robe placed a small stone in my hand. Clear as a drop of water, he said, keep it in your hand until it shines, for that light will lead you to where earth meets heaven. I understood that it was a metaphor, that the true light was not in the stone, but in the human hand that learns to pray through action, not through words. The Knights later called this practice ars lux, the art of light, and from that art they built cathedrals whose structures resonated with the sound of the universe. Each dome, each window, each stone was placed in correspondence with the stars in the sky, so that when the light passed through, it sang the song of creation. They did not only learn knowledge, they were transformed. And from then on, the maps they drew were no longer maps of land, but maps of the soul. The lines of longitude became currents of energy. The latitudes became levels of consciousness. I could see clearly that they were rebuilding the memory of Atlantis, not to restore its glory, but to redeem its sin. For the Brothers of the East had said that the ancient civilization fell not for lack of knowledge, but for lack of humility. They reminded the Templars that true power lies not in the ability to change the world, but in the ability to keep one's heart uncorrupted when one can. And perhaps this is the question I want to ask you, the one hearing this story. If you had the knowledge to turn stone into light, to heal disease, to bring life itself, what would you do with it? Would you use it to rule or to serve? Would you turn it into a weapon or into a prayer? Because that question is the measure God uses to decide who is worthy to remember his past. The Brothers of the East understood this, so they gave the map to the Westerners not to show them the way to treasure, but to test whether they could understand where the map truly led. The map did not point to the vaults beneath the temple, but to the temple within every soul. But men forgot. They held the map thinking it was a physical guide, and thus the search began. Yet there were still a few who understood. They kept the real map, the one drawn with stars, with breath, with prayer and light. I have seen part of that map. It does not lie on paper, but in the ancient memory of humankind, inscribed in the structure of our DNA like a sacred hymn temporarily forgotten. When a person lifts their eyes to the night sky with a pure heart, the map shines again within their sight. And when that happens, the brothers of the East will return, not in form, but in frequency. They will teach us that true knowledge is never lost. It is only waiting for one who is still enough to hear its sound again. They arrived in Jerusalem when the air still smelled of smoke and prophecy. The city was both ruin and revelation, its stones whispering of kings and exiles, its silence humming with the residue of prayer. The knights did not come as conquerors. They came as listeners. Beneath the Temple Mount, the sages of the East had said, there lay a memory older than Scripture itself, a remnant of a world that fell not by sword but by its own pride. And so, on a moonless night, they began to dig. There were no trumpets, no proclamations, only the soft scrape of iron against stone and the rhythm of breath echoing off the walls. Every shovelful of dust seemed to breathe with its own pulse, as if the earth itself recognized the return of those who once walked its secret corridors. They knew what they sought could not be named. The elders had told them it was a relic of light, a vessel that could hold divine energy, an echo of the covenant between God and creation. They did not seek gold, though they found gold. They did not seek power, though power trembled beneath their hands. What they sought was remembrance. In those tunnels, faith ceased to be belief. It became knowledge carved in stone. The Temple Mount was no ordinary hill. It was a mountain of silence that had swallowed ages of worship. Beneath it were chambers sealed by time itself, layers of forgotten civilizations, Canaanite altars, Hebrew sanctuaries, Roman walls, all built on top of one another like the strata of human longing. The deeper they dug, the more the air grew dense, not with dust, but with vibration. Some said it was the resonance of prayer absorbed into the rock. Others said it was the heartbeat of the ark itself. The chronicles speak of a moment when the ground shuddered softly, as though the mountain exhaled. A hollow tone rang through the cavern, low and pure. It was then that they found the passage a narrow slit between slabs of limestone, cut so precisely it could not have been made by ancient tools. Inside lay a corridor leading downward, lined with symbols that pulsed faintly under torchlight. The language was not Hebrew, not Greek, but something older, the same geometry the brothers of the East had traced in their meditations. They followed the passage until they reached a chamber carved like the inside of a heart. There, on a pedestal of white stone, rested a chest of acacia wood gilded in gold. The air around it shimmered, as though light bent differently near its surface. Some dropped to their knees, others wept without understanding why. They had found it, or something that wanted to be found. The chest bore no seal of Solomon, no mark of Israel, yet it radiated the same presence that prophets had described when they spoke of the Ark of the Covenant. The knights did not touch it immediately. They waited, as though awaiting permission. Hugh de Montclair, their leader, stepped forward, placed his hand on the air above the lid, and felt a warmth that was not heat but consciousness. He later wrote in his hidden journal that the chest was not a container but a living frequency, a bridge between spirit and matter. When they finally opened it, they saw no tablets of stone, no relics of doctrine. Instead, they found a fine dust, white, luminous, weightless. It clung to their skin like light, trying to remember its shape. This, the brothers of the East had called times manna asterisk, the monatomic essence of life. It was said to conduct energy directly from the divine, to heal, to awaken, to make the body remember the pattern of immortality. In that moment, they understood why this secret had been buried. Humanity was not ready to bear the weight of such purity. The knights sealed the chest again, yet something within them had already opened. From that night forward, their prayers changed. No longer were they pleas, they became conversations. No longer did they worship a distant God. They communed with a presence that pulsed inside every atom. And yet, with knowledge comes danger. They knew the church would never understand. The clergy sought order, not awakening. What the knights had touched could not be controlled. It made kings irrelevant and priests unnecessary. So they vowed silence. They would become the guardians not of treasure, but of truth. They built catacombs and vaults, hidden tunnels beneath the city, sealing away what they had found in layers of misdirection. For every passage that led nowhere, one led deeper. For every decoy relic, one shimmered with the true fire of creation. Centuries later, when invaders tore through Jerusalem, none found what the knights had unearthed. The mountain had reclaimed its secret, but the men who touched it were never the same. They carried a residue of that light within them, a vibration that could not be erased. Some said their eyes began to glow faintly in the dark. Others said their presence calmed beasts and children alike. It was as if the essence of the mountain had followed them. I have seen in trance those same men years later scattered across Europe, founding monasteries that doubled as laboratories of divine science. Their architecture echoed what they had seen: underground arches that mirrored the human rib cage, altars that aligned with solstices, spires that drew lightning like fingers of prayer. They were rebuilding the holy mountain fragments across continents, not a mountain of stone this time, but a mountain of minds, an invisible temple stretching across the world. The first spade of earth they turned beneath Jerusalem was more than an act of excavation. It was a covenant renewed. In lifting the dust, they awakened the memory of mankind's forgotten purpose: to reconcile heaven and matter, to turn the human heart into a living sanctuary of light. That is why I say the true Temple of Solomon was never destroyed, because it was never merely built, it was time's remembered asterisk. What they uncovered in the heart of that buried chamber was not a relic, not an artifact of worship, but an idea made tangible, a revelation given weight. The acacia chest gleamed faintly in the dim torchlight, its gold surface flickering with an inner pulse, as if the metal itself remembered the touch of a divine hand. They had expected to find symbols of their faith, perhaps the stone tablets of Moses, perhaps the lost Ark of the Covenant itself, but what awaited them was stranger, older, and infinitely more dangerous. Inside the chest lay no bones, no idols, no script of commandments. Instead, there was a small crystalline vial sealed in resin, and beside it a flat slab of what appeared to be green stone, translucent yet alive with veins of shifting light. When Hugh de Montclair raised the slab toward the flickering flame, it refracted the fire into spirals of emerald and gold, casting patterns on the walls that formed shapes, triangles within circles. Serpents biting their own tails, eyes without lids staring from the stone. The symbols were not carved. They moved, pulsing softly, as if the slab itself were breathing. The men called it the Book of Green Fire. The brothers of the East had spoken of such a tablet, one said, to contain the first science of God, the geometry of creation itself, the code that united matter, sound, and spirit. Later, alchemists would whisper its name, the Emerald Tablet. But this was not a tablet to be read. It was a mirror. Those who gazed upon it too long began to see shapes and equations inside their own eyes. It was as though the tablet was not teaching them, but remembering them. Around the tablet was a fine layer of white powder, gathered like frost at dawn. One knight brushed it with his fingers and felt no grain, no resistance. It dissolved instantly into warmth, coursing through his hand like liquid light. The brothers had called it manna, the monatomic essence of life, drawn from the bones of the earth and the breath of the stars. It was said to be the same substance that had fallen from heaven to feed the Israelites in the desert, the same that the Atlanteans had used to power their temples, the same dust God had breathed into Adam. In the quiet that followed their discovery, Hugh understood that they were standing before the memory of the universe itself. The chalice they later found beside the chest was not ornate. It was simple, made of a metal so pure it reflected no light. When they poured a trace of the white dust into it, the substance liquefied, glowing faintly blue-green, as if it recognized the cup. The men knelt. They did not dare drink, yet even inhaling the air around it made their bodies hum with vitality, their minds clear as crystal. In his journal, Hugh wrote that the chalice was not a vessel for wine, but for consciousness. It was meant not to be filled, but to awaken what was already within. The legends would later call it the Holy Grail, but that name diminished it. It was not holy because of what it contained, but because it revealed that every soul was itself a chalice of the same light. The more they studied what they found, the more they realized that each object, the chest, the cup, the tablet, was not a separate relic, but a component of a single technology. The ark generated energy, the cup transmuted it, and the tablet encoded its purpose. Together, they formed a trinity of creation. The inscriptions they deciphered from the walls spoke of resonance, of frequency, of the divine sound that shapes reality. In the beginning was the Word. The inscription seemed to echo, and the Word was vibration. The knights began to test the echoes within the chamber. When they struck the stone at certain intervals, the air vibrated with a harmonic tone that caused the dust to rise and shimmer in geometric patterns. It was the same principle the ancients used in their temples, sound as the sculptor of matter. The chamber became their cathedral of experimentation, a womb of rediscovery. The more they understood, the more they trembled. This was not superstition. This was precision, the science of the divine, far beyond the philosophies of Aristotle or the doctrines of Rome. They saw in these artifacts a bridge between heaven and earth, between the physical and the spiritual. The ark was the altar of energy, the chalice was the human vessel, and the tablet was the law written not by ink, but by vibration. Hugh de Montclair was tormented by what this meant. If these were truly instruments of the Creator, then the Church's entire structure of mediation, priests, sacraments, hierarchy, was rendered obsolete. For if man could touch God directly through understanding, then no temple of stone could contain him. Yet Hugh also understood the danger. Knowledge without purity breeds catastrophe. Atlantis had proven that. He remembered the words of the Brothers of the East. When man learns the language of light, he must first learn silence. So the knights swore an oath. They would divide the relics, conceal them across lands and centuries, guarding each piece not with armies but with myths. The ark would vanish beneath new temples, the chalice would be woven into stories of kings and saints, and the tablet would disappear into secret orders who would keep its memory alive through symbol and ritual. In that decision lay the birth of 1,000 legends. The world would remember fragments, the Grail, the Ark, the stone, but never the unity that bound them. Yet within the hearts of the knights, the unity endured. They had seen light behave like breath, matter respond like prayer, and sound bend space into form. They had glimpsed the workshop of God. Some nights, while the others slept, Hugh would sit before the tablet and speak to it softly, not as a man speaks to an object, but as a student to a teacher. He would ask questions not with words, but with thought, and sometimes the stone would answer not in language, but in rhythm, a pulse that entered his heartbeat. He began to understand the script of creation, that the same pattern which guided the stars also guided the soul, and that the true temple was the human form aligned with divine resonance. It changed him. When he returned to the surface, his eyes no longer sought the sky for signs. He had seen that the heavens were already inside him. The chest, the cup, the tablet, they were not treasures to own, but mirrors of what humanity had lost, the memory that we were once co-creators with the divine. The knights sealed the chamber again, burying it in darkness, trusting that one day light would find its way back. They left no map, only a frequency, a prayer sung into the stone that could only be heard by those whose hearts vibrated in harmony. That, perhaps, is the truest secret of the Knights Templar. Their quest was never to possess holy relics, but to preserve the blueprint of awakening. They did not steal from God, they safeguarded his reflection. And somewhere, beneath centuries of dust and doctrine, the chest still waits, the cup still breathes, and the book of green fire still burns with the same whisper it spoke to them that night. Remember, Atlantis was not a myth born of salt and imagination. It was memory wrapped in water, a civilization that rose not merely from ingenuity, but from intimacy with divine law. Those who built it did not separate science from spirit, for to them knowledge was worship and understanding was prayer. Their cities gleamed not because they mastered stone, but because they mastered harmony. Power in Atlantis was not a resource to be harvested, it was a rhythm to be kept, and as long as that rhythm aligned with the higher order of creation, their world flourished. Crops grew without toil, weather obeyed the intention of the wise, diseases dissolved beneath resonance and light. They had touched the secret of the ark, The principle the Knights rediscovered beneath Jerusalem, that matter itself is obedient when love and wisdom are in equilibrium. But power, like fire, tests the vessel that holds it. The Atlanteans, growing certain of their control, began to believe that divinity was not a partnership but a possession. They turned temples of learning into laboratories of domination, seeking to bind the forces of life itself, to extend mortality into eternity by means of vibration and alchemy. In their pride, they lost the silence that guided them. Sound became noise, light became glare, and what was once communion became command. The frequency of their hearts fell out of tune with the cosmic order, and the very energy that once sustained them rebelled. The earth groaned, the sea rose, and the continent that had glittered like a jewel sank beneath its own arrogance. Only fragments survived, a few initiates who fled east and west, carrying not artifacts but remembrance. These were the seed-bearers, the ones who would plant echoes of their wisdom into Egypt, Sumer, and the hidden brotherhoods of the East. The Knights Templar, unknowingly at first, followed their trail. When Hugh de Montclair studied the Emerald Tablet, he realized its language was the same geometry that underpinned the legends of Atlantis. The tablet spoke of, as above, so below, a law as ancient as the first sunrise. It revealed that the order of heaven was mirrored within the human soul, and that every act of creation carried moral weight, for to shape matter without reverence was to wound the fabric of God. This realization struck the knights like a revelation and a warning. They saw the same hunger rising again in their own age, kings craving control over men's souls, priests hoarding truth as property, scholars dissecting the sacred to prove their cleverness. The fall of Atlantis was not an isolated event. It was a mirror of what happens whenever knowledge outpaces virtue. The true danger of forbidden knowledge is not that it destroys, but that it tempts. It whispers to man that he may wield divine power without divine compassion. And once that whisper is believed, collapse is inevitable. The moral architecture of the universe is uncompromising. It permits wonder, but not pride. It allows assent, but only through humility. When the Templars unearthed the relics beneath the Temple Mount, they understood that they were holding the same keys that once opened Atlantis. The white powder they called manna could feed the hungry or enslave the will, heal the body, or erase the boundary between man and God. The ark could radiate life or death, depending on the heart of the one who touched it. The Emerald Tablet could unlock the voice of creation or silence it forever. These were not gifts, they were tests. Hugh wrote in his secret codex that the relics did not destroy Atlantis, the Atlanteans did. Their instruments were pure, their intentions were not. And thus he made the vow that would define the Templar mission, that power must never again rise without conscience. He taught his brethren that knowledge must always kneel before love. He designed their temples to remind them of this law, naves aligned to the solstice, altars placed at the golden ratio, geometry that humbles by precision. The cathedral was not only a house of worship, it was a diagram of restraint. For in every line of sacred architecture lay a moral. Balance sustains beauty, but excess collapses form. In the years that followed, rumors of what they had found spread like wildfire. Monarchs wanted their secret. Popes feared their influence. The Templars grew rich, but wealth to them was a camouflage, a distraction for the world's eyes while they hid the deeper treasure, the doctrine of ethical creation. To those who sought their wisdom, they taught the paradox of divine craftsmanship, that to create truly, one must become transparent. The human ego, when placed between the Creator and creation, corrupts both. To build in harmony with God is to disappear within his intention. Atlantis fell because it tried to replace intention with intellect. Hugh feared that Europe would repeat that cycle, that men would worship mechanism instead of mystery, and his fear was justified. Even in his time, the seeds of mechanization were already sown the hunger to calculate, to measure, to control. The relics beneath the temple were proof that the pattern would repeat unless wisdom could temper curiosity. That is why he chose silence. The knights who followed him carried his creed into secret initiations. They encoded the lesson into symbols that would outlast words, the serpent eating its tail, to warn that all progress devours itself when detached from virtue. The cross within the circle to remind that divine power must always intersect with human sacrifice. Each ritual, each vow, each chant was designed to retune the soul to the frequency of humility before any hidden science was revealed. The brothers of the East had once said, "To touch the divine, your hands must be empty." That emptiness became the essence of the Templar way. When I have seen Atlantis in vision, it appears not as ruins under the sea, but as a living parable repeating through time. It rises whenever humanity discovers new fire, and falls whenever humanity forgets the heart. Today we call it progress, invention, civilization. But the sea remembers. The waves that swallowed the island still whisper warnings against the shore. Power without prayer will always sink. The Templars heard that whisper in the dark tunnels of Jerusalem, and they trembled. That tremor of conscience was the beginning of their true initiation. They realized that their quest was never to recover the technology of Atlantis, but to redeem it, to ensure that the next time humanity touched the source of creation, it would do so with reverence, not pride. That is the difference between the Atlantean scientist and the Templar mystic. One asked, "How can we use the divine?" The other asked, "How can we serve it?" And in that question lies the entire moral evolution of mankind. For the power that shaped the stars is not evil, it is impartial. It will obey the hand that wields it, but it will also reveal the heart that commands it. That is the true ethical law written in the green fire of the tablet and the white dust of the ark. That creation itself is a mirror. If man approaches it with purity, it will reflect light. If he approaches with greed, it will reflect destruction. Atlantis fell into the mirror and drowned in its own reflection. The Templars, standing before the same mirror, chose to close their eyes and pray. When the knights descended for the final time into the vault beneath Jerusalem, they carried not tools, but parchment, ink, and fear. They had uncovered the relics of power, but now they sought the relics of truth, the bones, the books, and the temple that could not be destroyed. The air was colder than before, the silence heavier, as though the earth itself hesitated to witness what was about to be revealed. Beneath the deeper chamber, behind a wall sealed with lime and lead, they found a crypt of unusual simplicity. Inside lay 3 ossuaries, carved not with royal crests or Hebrew script, but with symbols: an 8-pointed star, a fish, and a circle intersected by light. When they opened the first box, they expected dust. Instead, they found fragments of a skeleton, small, delicate, wrapped in linen that shimmered faintly as if woven from metallic thread. The second box contained a scroll bound in copper bands, the letters etched so finely they seemed burned into the material by light itself. The third held a small stone tablet with a single word engraved in a tongue older than Aramaic, a word that could only mean one thing: within. Hugh de Montclair knew at once that they had reached the true heart of their mission. The relics of the outer world had tested their courage, but these would test their faith. For what the scroll revealed was not a history to be preserved, but a truth to be endured. By the light of their lamps, the knights unrolled it and read words that trembled the foundations of everything they had been taught. The kingdom is not above nor below, but within. The Son of Man is the awakening of the divine in flesh. The temple is the body, the priesthood is the breath, and God dwells in all who remember. The author named herself simply as Times the companion asterisk, the one who had walked beside the Nazarene, not as servant, but as mirror. Her words spoke not of worship, but of union. She wrote that the Christ was not one man, but a condition, a state of luminous awareness that each soul could attain when it remembered its source. She wrote of her love not as romance, but as recognition, a joining of 2 flames from the same eternal fire. The scroll continued, with descriptions of ceremonies unknown to the church rites of inner resurrection, meditations upon the name unspoken, prayers not to a distant heaven, but to the spark within the heart. To rise again, she wrote, is to remember the self that was never born and cannot die. The knights sat in stunned silence. Around them the air grew thick with the feeling of presence, as though the walls themselves were listening. It was not blasphemy they felt, but revelation, an understanding that faith had always pointed inward, and that the human body was the first cathedral. The idea shook them more than any heresy. For centuries, the Church had built its empire on the mediation between God and man, on the notion that salvation required a key held by others. But this scroll rendered every door transparent. If the divine dwelled within, then no external authority could claim dominion over the soul. It was liberation disguised as danger. They understood now why such a text would have been buried, why the early fathers of doctrine had erased the traces of the feminine, why the voice of the companion had been silenced by history. Her words restored what theology had exiled: the sacred balance of creation, the equal sanctity of woman and man, spirit and matter, heaven and body. She spoke of the time's Shekinah asterisk, the indwelling light of God that once hovered over the ark and now hovered within the human heart. When two remember, she wrote, the light between them becomes the ladder of angels. The nights read until the oil in their lamps thinned. Hugh closed the scroll and pressed it to his chest, whispering that they had found not proof of the divine, but its echo inside themselves. The bones beside the scroll seemed to hum with the same frequency, as though the body that once carried this revelation had refused to surrender its radiance. It was said that the companion had been buried near those she loved, and that the relics here belonged to her and to the man who had shared her mission of remembrance. Whether that was true or not mattered little. What mattered was the vibration that filled the chamber, the undeniable sense that love itself was the language of resurrection. Hugh feared what this knowledge could unleash. If the Church learned that the Christ was within all, that salvation required no mediator. The entire world order would shatter. Yet he also knew this truth could not die again. So he and his brothers made a second covenant. The knowledge would be hidden not in stone, but in symbol. They would veil the gospel of the inner temple within architecture, music, and geometry, cathedrals that sang of it, paintings that hinted at it, rituals that preserved its rhythm. They would turn secrecy into sanctuary. The ossuaries were resealed, the scroll copied and divided, its pieces carried by knights who swore to protect them even unto death. In the years that followed, the Templars encoded its wisdom in every sacred structure they built. The nave represented the spine, the altar, the heart, the dome, the skull, and the light that entered through stained glass, the divine intelligence awakening through the senses. To walk into a Templar church was to walk into the anatomy of a prayer. They even designed labyrinths upon cathedral floors, each twist and turn mirroring the spiral of human DNA, an unconscious prophecy that one day science would rediscover what spirit had always known, that within the body lies the blueprint of the cosmos. Their rituals invoked the four elements not as superstition but as metaphor: the bones for earth, the blood for water, the breath for air, the spirit for fire. And in the silence between these, they felt the fifth element, the one no tongue could name: consciousness. That was the true grail, the vessel that never broke, because it was never separate. Hugh began to teach in whispers that to drink from that cup was to remember one's own divinity. To consume the bread of communion was not to receive God, but to awaken him within. Such teachings could not be proclaimed from pulpits, for they threatened the scaffolding of religion itself. So they were transmitted through brotherhoods, symbols, and dreams. When persecution later came, when fire and betrayal consumed their order, what they had learned did not perish. It went underground, not into earth, but into psyche, into the deep collective memory of mankind. And it is still there, waiting beneath the doctrines and divisions, waiting to rise again as it once did in that chamber beneath the Holy Mount. The bones, the book, the temple, all were maps pointing to the same destination: the interior sanctuary where God and man meet without witness. The Templars did not lose that temple. They became it. Each knight carried within him a small cathedral built of silence and devotion where the divine could dwell unmediated. That was the true inheritance of the Ark, the final revelation of the Grail, the meaning of the word engraved on the stone: within. For every age buries this truth beneath its own temples, and every few centuries a few souls brave enough to dig remember it again. It happened on a Friday, a day that began with silence and ended with fire. The sun rose over France in a pale haze, indifferent to the secret that was about to burn its way into history. By decree of King Philip IV, the Templars, those same men who had once knelt beneath Jerusalem's stones and touched the breath of God, were branded heretics. At dawn, soldiers surrounded their commanderies, iron-clad hands pounding on wooden doors that had known only prayer and study. They came not as seekers of truth, but as servants of debt, for the king owed the order fortunes he could never repay. Greed had found its holy justification, and faith was its victim. The knights were taken from their beds, their manuscripts seized, their vaults broken open. But the vaults that mattered could not be breached, for the true treasures had long been removed. Days before the arrests, Hugh de Montclair, now old and gray, had felt the tremor in the currents of destiny. He gathered his closest brothers and whispered what must be done. By candlelight, they loaded the last of the sealed chests, the ark, the cup, fragments of the scrolls onto ships, waiting in the harbor of La Rochelle. The sea was calm that night, unnaturally so, as if aware of the weight it would bear. Under a moon like silver judgment, the fleet slipped away into mist, carrying not gold, but the memory of divine light. When dawn came, the docks were empty. By the time the soldiers arrived, only the echo of waves remained. No one saw those ships again. Some said they fled to Scotland, others to Portugal, others still to the New World. But truth does not sail on maps. It sails on silence. Those who stayed behind were captured, hundreds of them dragged in chains through the streets of Paris. The church, persuaded by Philip's gold and the promise of control, sanctioned the trials. They called them inquisitions, but they were exorcisms of power. Torture chambers replaced sanctuaries. Iron crushed flesh, but it could not crush what the knights had seen beneath Jerusalem. The confessions that followed were extracted by pain, each word, a distortion born of agony. They confessed to worshipping idols, to consorting with demons, to spitting on the cross, lies written in blood to satisfy the pride of kings. The truth was simpler and far more threatening. They had discovered God within, and for that they had to burn. Among those imprisoned was the Grand Master, Jacques de Montclair, the same man who had once lifted the emerald tablet and understood that creation obeyed the law of balance. For 7 years he endured humiliation, interrogation, and solitude. He was offered freedom in exchange for betrayal, but he refused. He wrote in his final letter, smuggled out by a sympathizer, that the order had not been destroyed, only transformed. A tree cut to its roots grows inward, he said, and the roots will one day lift the stone. On the 13th day of October, in the year of our Lord 1307, the king signed the final warrant. The day was Friday. It was morning when the guards led Jacques to the square in front of Notre Dame. The city gathered to witness judgment, unaware that judgment had already been pronounced not by the church, but by heaven itself. The pyre was tall, built of oak and tar, its scent thick as betrayal. They tied the old man to the stake, his hands bound, but his gaze unbroken. A priest offered him a final chance to repent. Jacques looked at him calmly and said, "You repent first, for you have turned faith into commerce." The crowd murmured. The executioner hesitated. Then the torches touched the wood, and the flames rose. He did not scream. He began to pray not to be saved, but to bear witness. His words were carried by the wind, heard by some, feared by all. "Pope Clement, King Philip, before 1 year has passed, you will both stand before the judgment of God." The air itself seemed to recoil at the curse. The fire swelled, roaring like a living thing. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but ash and rumor. Yet the prophecy held. Within a month, Pope Clement V fell ill. While lying in state, lightning struck the chapel and set his coffin aflame. Before the year ended, King Philip suffered a stroke while hunting. He died within days, his mouth twisted in silence. The curse of the Templar had been fulfilled, and France trembled. But vengeance was not the purpose of that fire. It was purification. Something in that moment passed from matter into myth. The order had died in body, but its spirit multiplied, carried by those who escaped the arrests and by those who lived the truth the church could not kill. They became masons, scholars, wanderers, custodians of a light now hidden behind layers of secrecy. The Friday fire was not an end but a transmutation, the alchemical burning away of form to reveal essence. The Templars understood this even in their agony. The night before his death, Jacques had told his jailer, "What you destroy in flesh, you liberate in spirit." He knew that truth is immortal because it is made of resonance, not record. After the executions, strange rumors spread. Farmers near Paris claimed that the Seine glowed faintly at midnight, as though reflecting a fire beneath its waters. In the monasteries, monks reported dreams of knights walking through corridors of light, carrying chalices that shone without flame. Sailors in the Atlantic spoke of ghostly ships moving against the wind, sails bright as moons. These were not hauntings, they were echoes. The Templar frequency had entered the earth, woven into the collective soul of mankind. Each century since, it has resurfaced in those who seek knowledge, bound by conscience, architects who build with sacred proportion, scientists who pray before discovery, mystics who remember that divinity is the heartbeat of all creation. The curse of Jacques was never about death. It was about awakening. He cursed the corruption of faith, not the men themselves. The fire he kindled that day still burns, not in vengeance but in remembrance. Its embers lie in every soul that refuses to trade truth for comfort, every seeker who chooses the inner temple over the golden throne. The church tried to erase the Templars from history, but history itself refused. For though the order was disbanded, its pattern endured the geometry of its vision hidden in architecture, its creed whispered in the secret vows of Freemasons, its symbol resurrected wherever men and women dare to unite reason and reverence. The world changed, but the fire did not. Even now, when we speak of Friday the 13th as a day of misfortune, we echo that ancient morning when light met injustice and refused to yield. Superstition calls it cursed. Truth calls it consecrated. For the ashes of the Templars fertilized the soil of freedom. Their fall broke the monopoly of dogma and opened the path for the Renaissance, for science, for every future vision that dared to question authority. The lesson of their martyrdom was written in flame. Knowledge must serve compassion, or it will be burned away. And so, the curse remains not as doom, but as a vow whispered across time, that whenever power devours purity, the fire will return to cleanse, not to destroy, but to remind. The Friday flame still flickers in the heart of every soul that seeks, every conscience that refuses to kneel before corruption. It is not vengeance that endures, it is justice disguised as memory, the unextinguished light of those who once dared to find God beneath the stones and within themselves. The survivors of the fire carried nothing but symbols. What could not be written without being burned, they carved into stone. What could not be spoken without being silenced, they encoded in geometry. The age of cathedrals began not as an act of devotion, but as a language of survival. Those who still remembered the teachings beneath Jerusalem and the vision of Hugh de Montclair spoke in lines, arches, and proportions that the illiterate could never read and the powerful could never censor. They called this language the harmony of the eight. The number 8 was not decoration, it was revelation. In the secret codexes of the Templars, 8 represented the completion of a cycle, the return of matter to spirit, the octave where the same note vibrates higher, purified. It was the bridge between the temporal and the eternal. In the myths of the East, it was the lotus with 8 petals, the compass of creation. In Egypt, it was the Ogdoad, the 8 deities who birthed the Sunday to the Templars. It was the shape of resurrection. When they rebuilt in exile, they used this symbol as their foundation. In Scotland, their chapels took the form of octagons. In Portugal, their fortresses bore 8 towers. Even their crosses, those crimson emblems painted on white, were designs of balance. 4 arms of man intersecting, 4 arms of God, the meeting of heaven and earth in a single silent explosion of symmetry. The circle around it represented eternity, the cross within it incarnation. The pattern spoke to those who knew how to listen. For the initiated, each number, Each angle, each ray of light through stained glass was a fragment of the lost doctrine, that creation itself was a harmonic system, a divine architecture built on vibration. The cathedral was not a building, it was an instrument. Its spires tuned the air. Its stones resonated with the chants of those who understood how to awaken them. That is why, when a monk's voice rose in Gregorian chant within those vast halls, it was not merely music, it was physics made prayer. The sound struck the arches, echoed through the vaults, and returned multiplied like the word that once created worlds. The Templars had learned from the brothers of the East that stone remembers. Every vibration leaves an imprint, every prayer a pattern. When they laid the cornerstones of a church, they would first sing over them, imprinting a frequency that sanctified the material. The stone became more than mineral. It became consciousness in repose. That is why even now, when you enter certain ancient cathedrals, you feel the air change as though time thickens. The stones are alive. They speak in harmonics older than language, whispering to those whose hearts are still enough to hear. The most sacred of these whispers is the one carved into the architecture of Rosslyn Chapel, the Scottish masterpiece built by descendants of the Templar lineage. Every column, every arch, every window, there is a cipher. The angels carved in impossible poses, the green men sprouting vines from their mouths, the musical cubes that form an unplayed melody, all of it is scripture in stone. The number 8 governs it, 8 angels, 8 columns, 8 ribs of the vault, 8 pointed stars hidden beneath the ceiling. The builders knew that geometry is the handwriting of God. What scripture hides in metaphor, proportion reveals in silence. When sunlight enters through Roslyn's windows at certain hours of the solstice, it does not illuminate randomly. It traces a path, falling first upon the apprentice pillar, the column said to contain the secret pattern of life itself. Legend tells that the master mason forbade his apprentice to carve it. Yet the young man, guided by a vision, completed it while the master was away. When the master returned and saw it, he struck his pupil dead in envy. The story is symbolic. The apprentice represents the soul untrained, unapproved, but guided directly by divine inspiration. The master represents authority, jealous of revelation, that bypasses permission. The blood spilled on that floor was the same blood spilled on Friday the 13th. Innocents slain by the guardians of orthodoxy. Yet the pillar endures, winding upward like the double helix of creation, carved with dragons, vines, and spirals, echoes of the life force that moves through all things. The secret of the Templars lived within that pillar, that the path to God is not a straight ascent, but a spiral, forever returning to the same truth at higher frequencies. And the number that describes a spiral's completion, 8. For infinity itself, when laid on its side, takes the shape of 8. To them, the infinite was not distant, but cyclical, the eternal return of divine memory through matter. That is why their architecture was never static. Every arch was motion frozen, every vault a captured resonance. They built cathedrals as one might compose symphonies, each line a note, each light beam a chord. Their designs were prayers made visible. When the wind moves through those structures today, it still hums in frequencies aligned to the scale of C, the tone of the human heart. That was no accident. They had calculated the length and width of each nave to correspond to sacred ratios that magnify sound waves at that frequency. They were not merely masons, they were musicians of God. And the instruments they built continue to play, even when the players have turned to dust. But the number 8 carried another, deeper warning. In their secret councils, the Templars taught that humanity itself moves in cycles of 8 ages, 4 of ascent and 4 of decline. Each cycle begins with revelation, ascends through understanding, declines through pride, and ends in purification. Then the octave begins again. Atlantis had reached its 8th and final note when it fell. The age of the Templars was the 5th, and ours, they said, would be the 7th, an age of confusion before the octave renews. If humanity could awaken to the harmony of creation once more, the 8th age would dawn, the return of the true light. This prophecy was encoded in their symbol, the 2 riders on a single horse. It meant that the journey of humanity and divinity must move as one When balance is restored, the cycle closes, and heaven and earth resonate again. That is the meaning of the number 8, carved into their chapels, repeated in their codes, hidden in their legends. It is the promise that every fall carries within it the pattern of rising. For the stones remember, and what they remember, they will one day repeat. I have walked among those stones in visions, in places where the wind carries a low hum like distant thunder, and I have heard it, the resonance of the old builders still alive, the unbroken chord of faith and reason intertwined. The cathedrals, the octagons, the carved serpents and angels, they are not relics of the past, they are messages left for the future. Their geometry tells us what words cannot, that the divine never left, it simply changed its frequency. And when humanity learns once more to listen, to stand in stillness, to breathe in harmony, the stones will sing again, and their song will mark the return of the 8th day, the morning that never ends. In every generation, the pattern repeats, the relics may be buried, the names forgotten, but the current continues beneath the surface of history like a river under stone. The lineage of those who knew has never vanished, it has only changed its garments. What once called itself Templar later called itself Mason, Rosicrucian, alchemist, mystic, or simply seeker. The outer forms differ, the inner flame remains the same. And in our time, when churches turn to spectacle and science to arrogance, their silent work continues. They are not knights in armor anymore. They are scholars, dreamers, architects, and wanderers. They build not with stone, but with ideas, not temples of marble, but sanctuaries of consciousness. The modern keepers of the secret rarely know each other. They move quietly through universities, laboratories, monasteries, even among those who no longer believe in spirit. Some study quantum fields and see in their equations the same geometry that once was carved into Roslyn's arches. Others teach philosophy, art, or music, unaware that their yearning to unite truth and beauty is an echo of the same vow made beneath Jerusalem's dust. They are the inheritors of the inner temple, custodians of the ancient balance between light and form. In the 20th century, when men split the atom and touched the invisible fire of creation again, the secret awakened. The explosion that birthed destruction was also revelation, that energy obeys consciousness. The same moral law that governed Atlantis whispered again the reminder that knowledge without humility breeds ruin. Some heard that whisper and changed course. Tesla heard it, Jung heard it. A few scientists even today still hear it, though they dare not name it. It speaks in symbols rather than doctrines, in synchronicities rather than commandments. It calls to those whose intellect has not killed their wonder. That is the mark of the true descendant of the Templars, not lineage, but vibration. They recognize each other by resonance, not by sign. When two of them meet, whether in a conversation about metaphysics or in the silence of prayer, something ancient stirs, a shared memory of light hidden inside human limitation. They are bound not by oath but by awareness. They know that the Ark, the Grail, and the Tablet were never lost, because they were never objects. They were modes of consciousness, tools for aligning human will with divine rhythm. To touch them again is not to dig, but to awaken. Some keepers have tried to prepare the world for the next unveiling. They speak carefully, dressing truth in language the modern mind can accept, calling spirit energy, calling prayer frequency, calling miracle field effect. The vocabulary changes, the essence remains. They understand that if the divine were to appear again as a technology, humanity might mistake it for conquest. And so they wait, they teach subtly, using art and story as they once used stone. Look closely, and you will see their traces everywhere, in films that echo ancient myth, in architecture that still follows the golden ratio, in movements for consciousness and compassion that arise without central leader or creed. The Brotherhood has no headquarters now, because the temple is global. It exists wherever someone remembers that love and law are not opposites. But make no mistake, the struggle they face is as fierce as ever. The same forces that destroyed the Templars still rule in different names, corporations instead of kingdoms, propaganda instead of papal bulls. Power has changed its symbols, but not its appetite. And so the keepers adapt. hiding not in cloisters but in the folds of ordinary life. Their task is not to overthrow, but to preserve the thread of sacred reason through the chaos. They hold the memory that civilization is not built on conquest but on coherence. To them, every new age of discovery is a test, just as Atlantis was. The digital realm, the world of data and unseen networks, is another reflection of the divine pattern, a web of light connecting all minds. It could be paradise or prison, depending on the ethics of those who use it. The true heirs of the Knights know this. They labor quietly to weave conscience into the fabric of technology, teaching that consciousness must evolve as fast as invention, or the balance will break again. Sometimes they are dismissed as mystics or dreamers, but history has always mistaken prophets for fools. Beneath the noise of algorithms and the blinding light of progress, their work continues, guiding souls back toward inner stillness, teaching the new language of the arc vibration, compassion, unity. I have seen them in visions, scattered across continents, yet linked by an invisible pulse. A physicist meditating before her experiment, an architect adjusting his blueprint by intuition, a musician hearing tones that heal rather than entertain. Each in their own way is rebuilding the temple, not the one of stone, but the one of understanding. And though they may not wear the red cross, its shadow falls across their work. For that symbol, the intersection of vertical and horizontal, heaven and earth, remains the signature of their mission. They are the bridge between faith and fact, between the soul and the circuit. Some among them still carry fragments of the old bloodlines, families descended from those who sailed from La Rochelle with the relics. But blood is not what defines them. Remembrance does. They remember that human history is not linear but cyclical, that civilizations rise and fall by the same spiritual laws. And they know that the time of unveiling draws near again. The prophecies hidden in the geometry of the Templars spoke of an age when the knowledge of light would return not from monasteries but from the laboratories of men, when energy could be harnessed without fuel, when communication would be instant, when the barrier between mind and matter would dissolve. We are in that age now. Yet with every step forward, we hear again the echo of the old warning that technology without morality is the second fall of Atlantis. The keepers understand this, and their work grows urgent. They seek not to stop progress, but to guide it inward, to teach the builders of this new world to build first within themselves. For the true temple of the future will not stand in Jerusalem or Rome or Silicon Valley. It will stand wherever a human being becomes whole, wherever love and intelligence reconcile. That is the prophecy of the new Templar order, that the ark will open again when enough souls remember its language. The relics were never lost. They are waiting for resonance. And that resonance is rising, quietly, through every awakened mind, through every act of creation guided by compassion instead of greed. Those who hear it are already part of the brotherhood, whether they know it or not. They are the guardians of the eighth day, the architects of remembrance. Their swords are words, their shields are silence, and their battle is not against flesh, but against forgetfulness. When they work, the world becomes less random, more coherent. When they pray, the fields of energy align. They are the invisible keepers of a promise made beneath the Temple Mount, that light will return when humanity is ready to bear it without corruption. The ancient order has not died. It has become you, the listener, the reader, the seeker, who still feels the pull toward meaning amid the ruins of noise. You are their continuation. And when the time comes, the stones will answer again. The fire will purify but not consume, and the secret will no longer be hidden, because the world itself will have become the temple. If the ark were to open tomorrow, the world would not explode in light or judgment. It would not be an apocalypse of thunder or a revelation of flame. It would be something quieter, so quiet that only those who have learned to listen would hear it. If the ark opened tomorrow, I believe it would open inside us first. I have seen it in vision, not as an object of gold, but as a pulse, a vibration beneath the sternum, a trembling that begins when a soul remembers its origin. The relics, the temples, the prophecies, they were never external things. They were mirrors, pointing back toward the place we were too afraid to look. inward. For centuries, humanity has dug through stone and scripture, searching for the divine in tombs and stars. But the ark waits beneath our ribs, patient as eternity. Its gold is not metal, it is awareness refined until it shines. Its angels are not winged guardians, they are the polarities of our own nature, mercy and strength, thought and feeling, left and right stretching their wings until they touch. Between them, in the space of balance, the presence of God descends, not as a voice, but as knowing. That is the covenant. It was never about possession, but participation. The ark does not belong to any one people, faith, or nation. It belongs to the human condition itself. When we forgot this, we built religions to protect what needed no protection, and we built wars to defend what was never under threat. But the ark has always been safe, because it was hidden where greed cannot reach, in the unseen chamber of the heart. I have dreamed of the day it opens. The world does not shatter, it exhales. Power plants go silent, not from collapse, but from redundancy. Light flows differently, drawn from the same field that beats within every living thing. The oceans calm, as if relieved that men have finally stopped mining the bones of creation. Cities hum with a gentler electricity, one born not of fuel but of resonance. And for a brief moment, humanity looks at itself and recognizes its reflection in everything that lives. That moment, I think, is the true second coming, not the return of a man in clouds, but the return of consciousness into its rightful throne. When the ark opens, the veil between science and spirit will fall. We will understand that every discovery has always been an act of remembering. The equations of physicists will reveal the same symmetry that mystics once drew in sand. The frequencies that heal the body will be the same harmonics the Templars sang in their secret chapels. And what we call technology will no longer serve domination but communion. The question is not whether this can happen, it is whether we are ready to bear it. For the ark does not discriminate. It amplifies what is placed within it. If we open it with fear, we will magnify destruction. If we open it with reverence, we will magnify creation. That is why it has remained sealed for so long, why the true brothers of light have guarded its secret through fire and exile. The ark is the mirror of collective consciousness. If it were open today, what would it reflect? Our wars, our greed, our loneliness disguised as ambition? Or could it reflect something else, the quiet, persistent yearning of a species that still remembers, somewhere deep within, what it means to be whole? I do not know which reflection would prevail, but I have faith in the hidden pattern. I have seen it too many times. The fall that precedes awakening, the night that ripens the dawn. Humanity learns slowly, but it learns. Even the ruins of Atlantis have become warnings. Even the ashes of the Templars have become seeds. From their silence grew the idea that truth cannot be owned, that light cannot be monopolized. If the ark opens tomorrow, it will not be because someone found the right coordinates or deciphered the right code. It will be because enough hearts have reached the same frequency, enough souls have remembered the same promise that creation is a dialogue, not a conquest. The covenant was never broken, only forgotten. I imagine that when the ark awakens, its sound will be a single tone, so pure it will erase the noise of centuries. The tone will rise through our bodies, turning grief to recognition, anger to clarity. It will travel through the oceans, through the roots of trees, through the dust of the moon. Every atom will vibrate with one word: asterisk, return. Asterisk, return. To balance, to remembrance, to the rhythm that sustains all things. In that sound, the wars will fall silent, not because they are forbidden, but because they will seem absurd. The hunger for power will dissolve, not through punishment, but through understanding that nothing external can complete what is already infinite. I know this because I have seen what happens when even one person opens their inner ark. Their presence becomes a field. Around them, conflict softens. Machines work smoother, children sleep deeper, animals draw near. The world rearranges itself around coherence. Imagine, then, what would happen if millions did the same. The opening of the ark is not an event, it is a contagion of light. It begins in one heart and spreads through empathy, through art, through forgiveness. It cannot be televised or weaponized. It can only be lived. And yet, I also know the danger. Revelation without preparation is chaos. The light that awakens can also blind. That is why the keepers still work in silence, ensuring that when the moment comes, humanity's vessel will not crack under the voltage of remembrance. The ark will open when we have built within ourselves a structure strong enough to receive it, the inner temple of integrity, humility, and wonder. I have walked that temple in vision. Its walls are made of compassion, its foundation of truth, its roof of faith. It is not built of doctrine, but of listening. Inside there is no altar, because the entire space is the altar. And at the center of that temple, where the heart should be, burns a small flame, steady, colorless, eternal. That is the same fire the Templars carried across oceans, the same flame that outlasted inquisitions and empires. It is the light that does not burn, the illumination that does not blind. If the ark opens tomorrow, that flame will expand until it fills the sky, and we will realize it was never the end of the world, but the beginning of remembrance. The earth will not perish, it will awaken. The divine will not descend, it will emerge. And we, trembling and luminous, will finally understand what the knights knew beneath the stones of Solomon's temple, that the highest mystery of faith is not to find God, but to become his memory. I do not wait for that day as prophecy, but as promise. For every act of kindness, every question asked in reverence, every silence held in love, is already prying open the lid. The ark is not coming, it is unfolding. And if tomorrow it opens fully, I will not fear. I will bow, not in submission, but in gratitude that I was alive to see the world remember its own divinity, to hear the sound of heaven returning through the heartbeat of man, and to know, at last, that the secret we guarded for 1,000 years was never buried in earth at all. It was buried in us.